Robert had everything most people could only dream of. At 45 years old, he lived in a glass penthouse that touched the clouds, with windows so clean they sparkled like diamonds in the morning sun. His apartment was bigger than most people's. Entire houses filled with expensive furniture that cost more than what some families earned in a year. But here's the thing about having everything. Sometimes it feels like having nothing at all. Every morning, Robert would wake up to the same routine. His alarm would ring at exactly 5:30, not because he had to, but because successful people wake up early. That's what all the business books said anyway. He would shower in his marble bathroom, put on one of his 30 identical suits, and eat breakfast alone at a table that could seat 12 people. The silence in his apartment was so thick you could almost touch it. No laughter echoing from the kitchen. No family rushing around getting ready for school or work. Just Robert and the sound of his expensive coffee machine grinding beans that cost $50 a pound. His company was doing better than ever. TechFlow Industries had grown from a small startup in his garage to a billion-dollar empire in just 15 years. Newspapers called him a genius. Business magazines put his face on their covers. Young entrepreneurs wanted to be just like him. But success, Robert had learned, was a strange thing. The higher you climbed, the smaller everyone else looked. And the smaller everyone else looked, the lonelier you became. His office was on the top floor of a gleaming skyscraper downtown. Floor-to-ceiling windows gave him a view of the entire city, but he rarely looked outside anymore. Most days, he was too busy staring at computer screens filled with numbers, profit margins, growth projections, stock prices that went up and down like a roller coaster. The people who worked for him respected him, maybe even feared him a little, but none of them really knew him. How could they? Robert had built walls around himself so high that even he sometimes forgot what was on the other side. His assistant would bring him lunch at exactly noon. She was efficient, polite, and had been working for him for 7 years. But their conversations never went beyond business. "Good morning, sir. Here are your messages. Your 2 o'clock meeting has been moved to 3. Always professional, always distant. Robert told himself this was how successful people lived. They made tough decisions. They stayed focused. They didn't let emotions get in the way of business. But late at night, when the office was empty and the city lights twinkled below, he sometimes wondered if this was really living at all. He had a penthouse, but it wasn't a home. He had employees, but not friends. He had money in the bank, but no one to share dinner with. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had built an empire designed to connect people through technology, yet he was more disconnected than ever. Most evenings, Robert would stay in the office until well past sunset. Not because he had to, but because going home meant facing that empty apartment again. The silence would wrap around him like a cold blanket, reminding him of all the things money couldn't buy. When he finally did go home, it was usually in the back of a black car with tinted windows. The driver was polite but quiet, just the way Robert preferred it. Small talk felt awkward when you hadn't had a real conversation in months. His building had a doorman who would nod and smile, but their relationship never went beyond, "Good evening, sir, and have a nice night." Robert would take the private elevator to the top floor, scan his keycard, and step into his beautiful empty castle in the sky. The refrigerator was always stocked with expensive food that he barely tasted. The wine cellar held bottles worth thousands of dollars that he drank alone while watching the news. The entertainment system could fill the room with any movie, any song, any show he wanted. But somehow, everything felt flat, colorless, like watching life through a thick sheet of glass. Sometimes Robert would stand at his floor-to-ceiling windows and look down at the city below. He could see tiny figures walking on the sidewalks, cars moving like toys, lights glowing from apartment windows where families were probably having dinner together, talking about their day, laughing at inside jokes. He wondered what that felt like, to come home to voices calling your name, to have someone ask how your day went and actually care about the answer, to have problems that mattered more than stock prices and quarterly reports. But those thoughts were dangerous. They made him feel things he had spent years learning not to feel. So he would close the curtains, pour himself another glass of expensive wine, and get back to work. Work was safe. Work was controllable. Work was all he had left. This Thursday started like any other. Same alarm, same shower, same breakfast eaten in silence. The difference was so small that Robert almost didn't notice it at first. As he was getting ready to leave the office, something made him pause at his window. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that reminded him of childhood sunsets he had almost forgotten. For just a moment, something stirred inside his chest, a feeling he couldn't quite name. Instead of calling for his usual car, Robert made a decision that surprised even him. He would walk home tonight. Just this once, he would take the streets instead of hiding behind tinted windows. Maybe the fresh air would clear his head, help him sleep better. He grabbed his coat and headed for the elevator, not knowing that this simple choice, this tiny crack in his carefully constructed routine, was about to change everything. Sometimes the biggest moments in our lives start with the smallest decisions. Sometimes we have to step outside our glass towers to remember what it means to be human. The city looked different from street level, louder, messier, more alive. Robert pulled his coat tighter and started walking toward home, unaware that two small voices were about to shatter the walls he had spent 15 years building around his heart. Robert had been walking for about 20 minutes when he realized he was completely lost. Not lost in the way most people get lost. He knew exactly where he was on the map. But this neighborhood looked nothing like the sanitized route his driver usually took between his office and home. Here, the buildings were older, shorter, with character lines etched into their brick faces like wrinkles on a grandmother's cheek. Small restaurants with handwritten menus in their windows. Corner stores with neon signs that flickered and buzzed. Laundromats where he could see people inside, folding clothes and chatting with their neighbors. It was a completely different world from his glass tower, and Robert found himself slowing down, almost against his will. When was the last time he had really looked at the city he lived in? When had he stopped noticing the details that made a place feel alive? The sun had nearly disappeared now, leaving behind a purple twilight that made everything look softer somehow. Streetlights were beginning to flicker on, and Robert could smell food cooking. Not the fancy restaurant meals he was used to, but real food. Garlic and onions, bread baking, something that smelled like his grandmother's kitchen from 30 years ago. He was passing a small Italian restaurant when he heard them. Two voices, so quiet he almost missed them over the sound of traffic and city life. But something about those voices made him stop and listen. "Excuse me, sir? Could we have your scraps?" Robert turned around, expecting to see teenagers or, maybe, homeless adults. Instead, he found himself looking down at two of the smallest people he had ever seen asking for help. Twin girls, maybe 8 or 9 years old, standing beside a dumpster behind the restaurant like they had every right to be there. They were identical in every way except for their clothes. One wore a red sweater that was too big for her tiny frame, the sleeves rolled up several times so her hands could peek through. The other had on a blue jacket that looked like it had been handed down from someone much older. Their shoes were clean but worn, the kind that had walked many miles but were still being taken care of. But it wasn't their clothes that made Robert freeze in place. It was their eyes. Most kids who ask strangers for things have a certain look, desperate, maybe a little scared, sometimes defiant. These girls had something completely different. They looked at him with a quiet confidence that seemed impossible for children their age. Like they had figured out something about the world that most adults never learn. "I'm sorry," Robert said, his voice coming out rougher than he intended. "What did you say?" The girl in the red sweater stepped forward slightly, her chin raised, with a dignity that would have impressed any boardroom full of executives. "We asked if we could have your scraps, sir, from your dinner. If you have any leftover food you don't need." Robert looked around, confused. "I haven't eaten dinner yet. I don't have any food with me." The girls exchanged a glance that seemed to carry an entire conversation. The one in the blue jacket spoke up this time. "Oh, we thought you were coming out of the restaurant. We wait here on Thursdays because they throw out the day-old bread around this time. We didn't mean to bother you." They started to turn away, but something made Robert call out, "Wait! What do you mean you wait here?" The girls stopped and looked at each other again. Robert was beginning to realize that these two had a language all their own, a way of communicating without words that only twins seemed to possess. "We come here 3 times a week," the girl in red explained patiently, like she was talking to someone who didn't understand how the world worked. "Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday. Different restaurants throw out different things on different days. We've got it all mapped out." Mapped out? Robert found himself stepping closer, drawn in despite himself. The girl in blue reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small notebook that was held together with a rubber band. The cover was worn smooth from handling, and Robert could see the edges of papers sticking out, covered in what looked like careful handwriting. "We keep track," she said simply. "Which places throw out what, when they do it, how much we can usually get. It's like a schedule." Robert stared at the notebook, like it was some kind of miracle. In his world, people paid consultants thousands of dollars to create systems half as organized as what these two children had figured out on their own. "Can I ask why you need to do this?" he said gently, crouching down so he was closer to their eye level. The girls looked at each other once more, having another one of their silent conversations. Finally, the one in red seemed to make a decision. "Our grandma is sick," she said matter-of-factly. "She needs medicine, and medicine costs a lot of money. Our mom works 3 jobs, but it's still not enough sometimes. We're not asking for charity or anything. We just don't like seeing good food go to waste when people are hungry." The simplicity of it hit Robert like a punch to the chest. Here were 2 children who had identified a problem, created a solution, and implemented it with more efficiency than most of his employees showed at work. And they weren't complaining about it or feeling sorry for themselves. They were just doing what needed to be done. "How old are you?" he asked. 8, they said together, then giggled at their synchronization. 8 years old. When Robert was 8, his biggest worry was whether he'd finish his homework in time to watch cartoons. These girls were running what was essentially a small logistics operation to help feed their family. "This notebook," Robert said, pointing to the worn book in the blue jacket girl's hands. "What else is in there?" She looked at her sister, who nodded encouragingly. "Well, we keep track of nutrition, too. Like bread is good for energy, but vegetables have vitamins. And we calculate walking distances between places so we don't waste time or energy going back and forth. And we track which foods last longest, the red sweater girl added. Because sometimes we can get enough for a few days, but we need to know what will stay good and what needs to be eaten right away. Robert felt something crack open inside his chest. These children had created a comprehensive food recovery system that took into account supply chain management, nutritional analysis, route optimization, and inventory control. They were 8 years old. "Are you in school?" he asked. "Of course," they said together again, this time without the giggles. "We're good students," the blue jacket girl said with obvious pride. "We want to go to college someday, maybe become doctors or scientists or business owners." "Business owners?" Robert repeated. The red sweater girl's eyes lit up. "We've been thinking about starting a real food rescue program when we get older, like working with restaurants and grocery stores to give leftover food to families who need it instead of throwing it away. It would help people and help the environment too." Robert sat down completely now, right there on the curb next to the dumpster, his expensive suit forgotten. These two remarkable children were describing his life's work, seeing inefficiencies in systems and finding ways to fix them, except they were doing it to help people, not to make money. For the first time in years, Robert felt truly curious about something that had nothing to do with profit margins or stock prices. He wanted to know everything about how their minds worked, how they had figured all this out, what other ideas they had. "Would you mind," he said carefully, "if I asked you a few more questions about your system?" The girls looked at each other one more time, and Robert saw something shift in their expressions. Maybe it was the way he had sat down to their level or the genuine interest in his voice. But whatever it was, they seemed to decide he was okay. "Sure," they said together. And right there, on a city sidewalk next to a dumpster, a billionaire CEO got his first real education in what business was supposed to be about. What happened next would stay with Robert for the rest of his life. The girl in the blue jacket carefully opened her worn notebook, and suddenly Robert was looking at something that belonged in a business school textbook, not in the hands of two 8-year-olds sitting beside a dumpster. The first page was covered in neat, careful handwriting. At the top, someone had written "Food Recovery Schedule" in purple crayon. Below that were 7 columns, one for each day of the week. Each column was filled with restaurant names, times, and notes written in different colored pencils. "See," the red sweater girl explained, pointing to Tuesday's column, "the bakery on 5th Street throws out day-old pastries at closing time, but you have to get there before the garbage truck comes at 8. And the grocery store on Main puts out expired produce on Tuesdays and Fridays, but only the stuff that looks bad. Most of it is still perfectly good to eat." Robert's eyes moved down the page, taking in detail after detail. These children had mapped out the entire neighborhood's food waste cycle. They knew which restaurants were generous with portions, which stores threw out items just because of sell-by dates, even which apartment buildings had residents who sometimes left extra food by the dumpsters. "How long did it take you to figure all this out?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The girls looked at each other with that silent communication again. "About 6 months," the blue jacket girl said. "We started just asking around the neighborhood, but then we realized we needed to be more organized about it." She flipped to the next page, and Robert's jaw dropped. It was a hand-drawn map of the surrounding 6 blocks, with different colored lines showing the most efficient walking routes between food sources, red lines for high-priority stops, blue lines for backup options, green lines for the quickest paths home. "This is incredible," Robert breathed. "You made this yourselves?" "We're good at math," the red sweater girl said with quiet pride. "And we like solving problems. Our teacher says we think like engineers." The blue jacket girl turned another page, revealing what looked like a nutrition chart. Different foods were listed with notes about vitamins, calories, and how long they stayed fresh. Some entries had little stars next to them. "The stars mean it's something Grandma especially needs," she explained, noticing Robert's puzzled look. "Like, oranges have vitamin C, which helps when you're sick. And spinach has iron, which is good for people who feel tired all the time." Robert felt his throat tighten. These children weren't just collecting random food. They were making sure their sick grandmother got proper nutrition. They had turned necessity into science, hunger into strategy. "Can you tell me about your grandmother?" he asked gently. The girls' faces softened immediately. You could see how much they loved her just in the way they looked at each other before answering. "She used to take care of us after school," the red sweater girl said. "When Mom was at work, she would help us with homework and make the best grilled cheese sandwiches in the world. She always smelled like vanilla because she loved to bake cookies." "But then she got sick," the blue jacket girl continued, her voice getting quieter. "Something with her heart. The doctors say she needs medicine to make it work better, but the medicine costs more than our rent. Mom cries sometimes when she thinks we're not looking," the red sweater girl whispered. "She works at the diner in the morning, cleans offices in the afternoon, and does laundry for people at night. She's so tired, but she keeps saying everything will be okay." Robert had to look away for a moment. He was thinking about his penthouse apartment, about the wine in his refrigerator that cost more than these families probably spent on food in a month, about the medicine cabinet in his marble bathroom filled with vitamins and supplements he barely remembered to take. "So you decided to help," he said. "We're family," they said together, as if that explained everything. And maybe it did. The blue jacket girl flipped to another page in the notebook. This one was covered in numbers. Calculations that looked like algebra, not something 8-year-olds should know how to do. "We figured out that if we can save Mom $15 a week on groceries, that's $60 a month," she explained, pointing to the neat columns of addition. "And if we save $60 a month for 6 months, that's enough to buy one month of Grandma's medicine." "We're almost there," the red sweater girl added excitedly. "We've saved $53 so far, only 7 more to go." Robert stared at the numbers, his business brain automatically checking their math. It was perfect. These children had created a budget, set a goal, and tracked their progress with more precision than most adults brought to their finances. But there was something else in the notebook that made Robert's chest ache. Tucked between the food schedules and nutrition charts were drawings, crayon pictures of a family sitting around a dinner table, everyone smiling. A grandmother with gray hair and kind eyes, hugging 2 little girls. A woman who must be their mother, wearing what looked like a work uniform, but with a big smile on her face. "You drew these?" Robert asked, pointing to the pictures. "That's what we're working toward," the blue jacket girl said simply. "When Grandma gets better, when Mom doesn't have to work so many jobs, when we can all have dinner together again like we used to." The red sweater girl leaned over and pointed to one particular drawing. "This one's my favorite. See? We're all in the kitchen, and Grandma's teaching us how to make her special cookies. And Mom's there too, and she's not tired anymore." Robert had attended countless business presentations about 5-year plans and long-term strategies, but nothing had ever moved him like this crayon drawing of a family's simple dream. "You know what's amazing about what you've done here?" he said, his voice thick with emotion he didn't try to hide. "You've taken a big problem and broken it down into small, manageable pieces. You've identified resources that other people were overlooking. You've created efficient systems to maximize your results, and you've stayed focused on your goal even when it seemed impossible." The girls looked at him with those wise eyes. "Is that good?" the red sweater girl asked. "It's more than good," Robert said. "It's brilliant. What you've created here is better than anything I've seen in 20 years of business." He meant it. He had sat through thousands of meetings where highly paid consultants presented strategies that weren't half as thoughtful as what these two children had figured out on their own. They had seen a need, identified available resources, created systems to optimize their efforts, and maintained focus on their ultimate objective. But more than that, they had done it all with love. Every calculation, every route, every star next to a vitamin-rich food was motivated by their desire to help their family. They weren't trying to make money or gain power or impress anyone. They just wanted their grandmother to get better and their mother to smile again. "We should probably get home," the blue jacket girl said, glancing at the darkening sky. "Mom will worry if we're late." "Of course," Robert said, starting to stand up. But something made him pause. "Can I ask you one more question?" The girls nodded. "When you save up enough money for your grandmother's medicine, what happens next? Do you keep doing this or do you stop?" The girls exchanged another one of their silent conversations. Then the red sweater girl smiled, the first real smile Robert had seen from either of them. "We keep going," she said. "But not just for us. We want to help other families, too. There are lots of people in our neighborhood who could use good food. That's just getting thrown away." "We want to make it bigger," the blue jacket girl added, "like a real organization that connects restaurants with families. So no one has to be hungry and no food gets wasted." Robert sat back down on the curb. He had found something he didn't even know he was looking for. Two children who understood business better than most adults, who had turned compassion into action, and who dreamed of using their skills to help others. For the first time in 15 years, Robert felt like he was exactly where he was supposed to be. Robert couldn't sleep that night. He lay in his king-sized bed, staring at the ceiling of his penthouse, but all he could see were two little girls with worn notebooks and dreams bigger than his entire company. Every time he closed his eyes, he heard their voices explaining their food recovery system with the kind of passion he hadn't felt about anything in years. At 3 in the morning, he gave up trying to sleep and walked to his floor-to-ceiling windows. The city sparkled below him like a circuit board, millions of lights representing millions of lives. For the first time, he wondered how many of those lights belonged to families like the twins. People working multiple jobs, choosing between medicine and groceries, finding creative ways to survive in a world that seemed designed to make that impossible. He thought about his wine collection, his expensive art, his closet full of suits that cost more than most people made in a month. None of it felt real anymore. It was like he had been living in a museum of his own success, surrounded by beautiful things that meant nothing. By 5:30, Robert was already dressed and heading back to that alley behind the Italian restaurant. He didn't have a plan. He just knew he needed to see those girls again. They were there, just like they said they would be. But this time, they weren't alone. An older woman was with them, probably in her 70s, moving slowly but with dignity. Even from a distance, Robert could see the family resemblance, the same intelligent eyes, the same way of holding their heads high despite their circumstances. "Grandma, this is the man we told you about," the girl in the blue jacket was saying, as Robert approached. "The one who asked about our notebook." The grandmother looked up at Robert with eyes that had seen decades of life's ups and downs. There was warmth there, but also a wariness that came from experience. "My granddaughters tell me you were interested in their work," she said, her voice soft but strong. "More than interested," Robert said, surprising himself with how honest he sounded. "I was amazed. What they've created is remarkable." The grandmother smiled, and suddenly Robert could see exactly where the girls got their strength from. "They're special, these two. Always have been. Even when they were tiny, they were problem solvers. If one of their toys broke, they'd figure out how to fix it. If they wanted something we couldn't afford, they'd find a way to make it themselves." "Tell him about the library project," the red sweater girl said excitedly. "Oh, that was last year," the grandmother explained, settling carefully onto a nearby crate. "The girls noticed that the local library was going to throw away old books because they were getting new copies. So they organized all the kids in the neighborhood to create a book exchange program. Now families can trade books instead of buying new ones." Robert felt that crack in his chest widening. "They did that when they were 7? 7.5, the blue jacket girl corrected with a grin. The grandmother's expression grew more serious. "When I got sick, I was afraid they'd have to give up being kids, you know. I didn't want them worrying about adult problems, but they insisted on helping. Said we're family, and family takes care of each other." "They told me about your medicine," Robert said gently. "About how they're trying to save money to help." The grandmother's eyes filled with tears, but she blinked them back. "I tell them it's not their responsibility, but they won't listen. They're determined to help, and when these two make up their minds about something—" She shook her head with a mixture of pride and worry. "We're almost there, Grandma," the red sweater girl said, hugging her grandmother's arm. "Only $7 more to go." That's when Robert made a decision that would change all their lives. "What if I told you there was a way to get that medicine? Money today?" he said. "And what if I told you there was a way to help other families at the same time?" The girls looked at him with sudden attention. "What do you mean?" the blue jacket girl asked. "I mean, what if your food recovery program became something bigger? What if instead of just helping your family, it could help hundreds of families?" Robert pulled out his phone and showed them a picture of his office building. "I run a company that helps businesses solve problems. And you two have solved a problem that nobody else has figured out. How to stop food waste while helping people who need food." The grandmother raised an eyebrow. "What exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying your granddaughters have created something that could change the world. Their system, their ideas, their maps and schedules. It's exactly what we need to start a real food rescue program in this city." Over the next hour, sitting on crates and boxes behind that restaurant, Robert outlined his idea. His company would fund a pilot program based on the girls' system. They would work with restaurants, grocery stores, and food suppliers to redirect surplus food to families who needed it. The twins would be the consultants, the experts who understood how the system should work. "You want to pay us to help other people?" the red sweater girl asked, her eyes wide. "I want to pay you because you're the smartest business partners I've ever met," Robert said, "and because your ideas can help thousands of families." The girls looked at their grandmother, who was staring at Robert with an expression he couldn't quite read. "This is real?" she asked finally. "As real as it gets," Robert said. "But only if the girls want to do it. It would mean working with my team, teaching adults how your system works, helping us set up programs in other neighborhoods." "Would we still go to school?" the blue jacket girl asked. "School comes first, always," Robert assured her. "This would be after school and on weekends, and only if you want to do it." The twins had another one of their silent conversations, and Robert could practically see the wheels turning in their heads. Finally, they both turned to him with identical grins. "We want to do it," they said together. 3 months later, the Community Food Connection program had expanded to 12 neighborhoods across the city. The twins had become minor celebrities, featured in newspapers and on local TV shows as the young entrepreneurs who had solved hunger and food waste with nothing but notebooks and determination. But for Robert, the real transformation was personal. His penthouse apartment wasn't silent anymore. The girls and their grandmother visited regularly, filling his space with laughter and family stories. He had learned to cook simple meals, discovered the joy of game nights and homework help sessions. His company had found new purpose, too. Instead of just chasing profits, they were solving problems that actually mattered. The food recovery program had grown into a national model, and other cities were asking for help implementing similar systems. The medicine for the grandmother was no longer a worry. In fact, the family had moved to a larger apartment with a real kitchen where she could teach the girls to bake her famous cookies. Their mother had been able to quit 2 of her 3 jobs and was taking night classes to become a nurse. But perhaps the most important change was in how Robert saw success. He still ran his company, still made good money, still lived in his penthouse. But now he measured success differently. It wasn't about how much money he made or how high his building was. It was about how many families his work could help, how many problems his resources could solve, how many dreams his success could make possible. On a warm evening, 6 months after that first meeting in the alley, Robert sat at his dining room table with his new family, because that's what they had become. The twins were doing homework while their grandmother helped him plan the next expansion of their program. Their mother was studying for a nursing exam, occasionally asking for help with medical terminology. "You know what's funny?" the grandmother said, looking up from a map covered in colored pins showing all their program locations. "What's that?" Robert asked. "6 months ago, my granddaughters thought they were just trying to save $7, but they ended up saving something much more valuable." "What did they save?" Robert asked, though he thought he already knew the answer. The grandmother smiled and gestured around the table, at the homework and planning documents, at the family that had formed from the most unlikely beginning. "They saved you," she said simply. "And in doing that, they saved all of us." Robert looked around at his dining room, finally filled with the voices and laughter he had been missing for so many years. Outside his windows, the city sparkled with the same millions of lights, but now he knew that behind many of those lights were families who had enough food on their tables because 2 8-year-old girls had refused to accept that hunger was just a fact of life. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest truths. Sometimes the youngest hearts hold the oldest wisdom. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, 2 little girls asking for scraps can teach you what it really means to be rich.